All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome. Welcome to Disenthrall, members of House. Oh, I had this one. Oh, I messed up my intro. This is the problem with live streams. Greetings, members of House Oros and Ordos. God, I did it again. Oh, man, I'm terrible. Okay, look. Forget the intro. Today, I've done a lot of research, kind of in a rush. I want to get this out to you, so I'm doing it as a live stream. I did a lot of research on a new thing called Dropgangs, which are sort of, think of it as like the next-gen black market. Some really cool information that I kind of compiled from a couple sources and wanted to walk through with you. A couple things first. If you like this content, remember to hit the like button and the share button and the subscribe button to help the channel grow, which you guys have been doing awesomely lately, I must say. The content, the reporting that we did on the Houston murders has been wildly successful for the channel, and it's definitely a market signal that we should probably look into doing more content like that. Welcome to the live stream, Barry, Froggy, and Carl. Good to see you. Okay, the last thing I want to say before I get into this is that YouTube has broken our last 2 live streams during the processing. So after the live stream was over, YouTube processed it, and then anybody that watched the live stream again later, the audio was way out of sync. If that happens to you, check the first comment down below. I will have re-uploaded a fixed copy that hopefully YouTube will not screw up. Or you can watch our video on any of our other platforms. You can find all the platforms at disenthrall.me/platforms. Okay, cool. So, the history of black markets begins pretty much at the same time as governments began. So, there were free people, once upon a time, there were free people trading amongst themselves, buying and selling goods that they wanted from people that supplied the things that they wanted. Then, there were people calling themselves government and imagining themselves to have the rightful authority to control what other peaceful humans around them traded amongst themselves. And thus, the black market was born. And that is what we will be talking about today. Black markets since then have always existed and will always exist as long as people try to control other people's peaceful behavior and property using the guns and immoral force that is government. Then came along, pretty recently in terms of the span of history, then came the internet. For the first time, humans all over the world could interconnect, could talk almost without restriction at the time. The only restriction was the people that knew how to use this new thing that was the internet. Porn, prostitution, sharing music, software, and illicit data, and counterfeit docs, you know, like counterfeit driver's licenses or whatever like that. That was kind of the first black market, the first products that started to be traded on this new internet. They were traded openly, kind of in the clear. No one was really watching the internet at the time because it was brand new. And so this stuff was able to pretty much just happen via normal communication technology. Well, what we consider normal at the time was pretty new and revolutionary, like email and simple websites. Payment and delivery, though, back then, still required in-person meetings, generally, is how it was done. You had to basically pay cash. Credit cards were the only kind of useful, functional method of paying for things back then, but obviously the government forces themselves into those companies' records at will, and so it is anything but private and secure and safe to use when trying to trade freely in products that politicians have deemed verboten. What? He won't be on right now, but surely he'll comment later tonight. Can you guys hear me okay? Audio good? Okay, we're good. All right, cool. So, then came along Bitcoin. We're kind of fast forwarding a few years. For the first time, humans on the internet gained the ability to trade currency over the internet outside of government control. I know we're just going over the history really quickly, and then we'll get into the new crazy awesome stuff. Following Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, then there were secret online markets. So these were websites and chat rooms where people could trade cryptocurrency for products that, again, the government wanted to control. The problem with this is that people had to know how to find them, or had to have like a word of mouth. Hey, check out the secret website where you can buy the things that you want to buy. Obviously, this was vulnerable and fell victim to government intrusion and spying very quickly. Then there came Tor. The Onion Router is what that stands for. It's basically a technology that layers on top of the internet that allows people to have kind of what we would normally think of as internet connectivity, but done with, without going into too much detail, cryptology that allowed people to talk privately. This was kind of huge because now we have humans all over the world that can communicate in a private and secure and untraceable way at the time. Then there were darknet markets. And this, of course, we have to start by mentioning Silk Road and Ross Ulbricht, the inventor of Silk Road, which was the first online darknet marketplace for free trade amongst humans. He was eventually caught and is currently in a cage by the government, obviously by the government, currently in a cage with very few possibilities of freedom existing for him left, except for a current signature drive that they have going right now to attempt to get President Trump to grant him, it's not asylum, what do you call it? Not clemency, basically nullify his sentence or whatever. Go to freerouse.org for more information on that and to help him out by signing that petition. So, the cool thing about these darknet markets is that for the first time in the world, not only do we have free association between people, totally free trade between humans all over the world, these platforms supported multiple merchants, so it wasn't just like a single salesperson. It was anybody could come and sell their wares and compete over prices that, a full market developed here. A very complex, dynamic marketplace developed. It provided merchant to buyer and buyer to merchant private, secure communication, encrypted communication. It provided merchant reputation tracking, which, aside from just like word of mouth stuff, it might have been the first time in the history of the world that a black market has had a reputation tracking capability. So you didn't have to just hope that the person you were doing business with wouldn't rob you or worse. Because you could look at, oh, this merchant has had 5,000 transactions before this one. So, and he's got a 4.8 star review, just like you would, look to check before buying something from somebody on eBay. Exactly the same thing. Made for an extremely safe marketplace, an extremely trustworthy marketplace. On top of that, for people that maybe were where that wasn't even good enough for them, the markets would provide escrow and like dispute resolution. So, excuse me. So, cryptographically, with your Bitcoin, let's say, you wanted to buy a product, you can set up the transaction without going into too much detail to where, for the money to finish transferring, 2 out of the 3 parties involved had to check it off, say, okay, this is good, product received, whatever. So if let's say we had a bad merchant who didn't ship the product or shipped a bad product or whatever, then the customer could appeal to the marketplace and say, hey, I didn't get what I paid for. Don't give the merchant my money and give the money back to me. Give the crypto back to me. So with your check mark and the merchant's check mark, you could get that money back and the merchant wouldn't get it. So people wouldn't get screwed. Another layer of awesomeness that never existed in the history of human black markets. Shipping on these markets were done using normal postal systems and methodologies. UPS, FedEx, this is, American stuff, DHL, and sometimes even like the United States Postal Service here locally, which was probably a lot more dangerous, but This was a centralized model where the marketplace connected buyers and sellers. The sellers didn't have representation. Merchants had to acquire the product that they sold the old-fashioned way, and these were generally like very simple, flat, no hierarchy organizations where a merchant would just get product in the old-fashioned way, buying it from the wherever they buy it from, and then selling it directly on the site. The pluses of this model were that you got great quality of product and of service and of reputation tracking and dispute resolution, all that stuff. There was a low level of fraud from merchants thanks to, again, the reputation system. It made this reputation system made everything way more trustworthy, way safer. Escrow, multi-party transactions, all this was awesome. All this was new. It made a large part of the black market. We have to remember that the black market has been created by government and has generally, for the history of the human species, been an extremely unsafe, violent, untrustworthy, fraud-ridden, just bad place for everyone involved. And for the first time in human history, we had a market free of control, of involuntary, immoral government control, free of violence as well. Generally, like by and large. I think there might have been a few reports of some bad things in certain isolated bubbles, but the point is, by and large, first time we had a peaceful market, a peaceful black market. There were drawbacks for this method, obviously. Ross is in a cage right now. So a few of them are that mass public, or like the layman's ability to adopt the use of this market or to adopt this technology was almost impossible. Like the general person would have to learn so much at the time. Remember, because crypto was new, Tor was new, sorry, cryptocurrency was new. The using Tor and darknet markets and finding this stuff and learning all this stuff, it was a massive barrier to adoption. You had to learn crypto. You had to learn how to trade fiat money for crypto and how to then do secure crypto transactions onto this darknet market that I'm sure appeared very shady, did appear kind of untrustworthy because it was brand new technology. Like, you just don't trust things that have just popped into existence. It was obviously very vulnerable to government agent account takeovers of like moderator accounts or admin accounts and merchant accounts. So if the government tracked down a merchant, they would often continue running that merchant's account, impersonating them, continuing to gather customer information and infiltrate the platform to get information on the other people that they wanted to put in cages over peaceful trade behavior. And often the other downside is because all this information about the transaction history and things like that were centralized and kept on record in perpetuity. When merchants' accounts were raided or admin accounts were raided and taken over, oftentimes the details and full sales transaction history of all the business that the merchant had done basically was just wide open and available and in government hands. So they didn't just get like the information on hand at the time and future transactions that they continued running. They also got the backlog, the history of all the stuff that the merchant had done. There was also an issue because Silk Road was by far not the only darknet market. There's even many of them in operation today of market fraud. So the markets themselves, because they were early on, before a lot of the the multi-sig transactions, meaning you have to have 2 out of the 3 people in the crypto transaction for the money to transfer. Before a lot of that was in place, you would have darknet markets that would appear. They would grow in popularity, and then the market owners, runners, people with access to the market would one day, once it grew to a certain size, they would take all the money that they were holding in escrow for all these transactions going on. They would just take all that and shut the doors, close the site down, and walk away with a lot of, at the time, not traceable cryptocurrency. And because it was a darknet site, no one had any idea who did it, so it was impossible to recover from that most of the time. So, that's kind of the history of free market trade, black market trade. Let's talk about this new thing called Dropgangs that is just sort of gaining momentum right now, and I have to assume is going to be the future, at least for the next 10, 15 years of black market activity. So, it still utilizes the internet, but it no longer utilizes Tor specifically. So it's basically a lot of these new messenger apps that you can get on your phone, things like Signal or Telegram, things like that. It's basically group channels where people can chat using these popular apps that are, Signal is a secure private communication app. Telegram is to a certain degree, I think, but they'll have these invite only, so you have to be invited to see them. Cryptographically, you have to be invited to decode them and even see what's going on these apps that are widely available on mobile devices. This allows, so this is like a one-to-one relationship now, instead of a marketplace with multiple merchants, all kind of competing together. Now it's more of a direct customer communication with the merchant using these encrypted communication methods. This allows merchants to control their exposure and their customer base in a much more detailed fashion than the marketplaces. So like, obviously, if you create an account on a darknet market, you can see a list of all the merchants. Well, now there is no central place with a list of all the merchants with a list of all their products that they're offering, things like that. This also eliminates, obviously, the risk of, market fraud, market taking all the money and going home. It gets rid of the risk of the market being taken down or taken over by government criminals, which is generally terrible for everyone involved, because if the market is merely taken down, all the customer relationships are lost. Oftentimes, a whole lot of money left in any accounts linked to that is just gone. It's bad news. It can destroy merchants entirely, even without the government putting them in cages. So the other thing is channels. The chat channels on these apps don't even have to be operated by a human. They can be operated by bots, which is just code that interacts with humans in a predefined way inside the chat room. So there'll be like chat commands that you can type in to browse the products, and the bot will detect those chat commands and respond with, images and information about the products in question. No humans are even needed anymore. So there isn't some human necessarily needed to run this this interaction, this market. In some ways, this provides a better user experience to the customers, because it instead of just like browsing and filling a shopping cart, let's say, you're actually texting, and sometimes you can actually interact with the merchant directly. You can ask questions and get responses, and oftentimes it feels like you're working with an actual person, because you are, instead of kind of working with a customer service response. Hopefully that makes sense. Repeat customers are often rewarded with unique contacts, unique direct people that they can message. This kind of goes back to a better customer service. So instead of just kind of joining these shared channels where a bunch of people are interacting, trying to shop the merchant, they're given direct one-on-one contacts with people where they are separated and sort of even more anonymized and harder to detect than the people in the shared groups. And it kind of ups the customer service. So once you become a trusted customer, you're able to get even better service, which is another thing you couldn't really get on the darknet markets. The one-on-one channels are much harder to detect and take down. Like if I'm using Signal right now to communicate with somebody in a one-on-one way, the Signal app uses the double ratchet algorithm that even if the most somebody could really know that was going on is that there's a conversation taking place between, there is a conversation taking place at this time. Much more than that, it becomes much more difficult. And so distinguishing one conversation from a million other conversations going on to try and find the drug or the black market one is almost impossible. So again, Tor is no longer used or needed. Each side can sometimes choose to use VPNs to, you know, add an additional level of privacy or anonymity. But that's mainly used on the sales and producer side that we'll talk about soon. A major difference here, and this is where the name Dropgangs comes in, is that we are replacing the postal services in general and shipping methods in general with in-person meetings. With in-person dead drops. So hopefully you've heard the term dead drops. If not, I can describe it. Basically, a dead drop is when, like, if I want to give you something, but I don't want to have to meet you, and you know, there doesn't ever need to be any in-person contact. What I will do is I'll take the thing I want to give you. Let's say it's this little white van, RV, and I will go out in public somewhere in the world and hide this in a skillful, hard-to-find way, and then, you know, maybe I'll take a picture of its location and record the GPS coordinates of its location, and then when you've paid me for the product, I send you the picture showing where it is and the GPS location so that you can then go and find the product. So that's kind of a dead drop, and that's how dead drops function, and it eliminates the need for shipping, which previously was you know, a vulnerable point in the chain, in the black market, because these carriers can, you know, use various techniques to detect the contents of packages, and then you know, the government can get search warrants to then track where the packages came from and potentially track them back to the shipper, and also can watch where they get shipped to track the people that are receiving them. So all that kind of gets eliminated with this dead drop thing. And that's pretty much the core of the big difference of what's going on here. So person-to-person, end-to-end encrypted communication mixed with dead drop delivery. So I'm just going through my notes here. A dead drop is when the product is left carefully hidden in publicly accessible places like parks, and the location is only provided to the people in the chain that need to know the location, such as the customer, who can then go to the location and pick it up. This makes the merchant, in large part, completely disconnected from the customer, and delivery becomes asynchronous. What that means is that the merchant can then basically hide a lot of products in different locations for future sales that haven't even happened yet. So they can divide up their product, plant it everywhere in public in very, you know, very well hidden, not just like dropping stuff on the ground or whatever, but hiding things in random places all at once. And then when he gets sales, he's basically selling the address or the location of the product for the person to then go and pick up. This has a big advantage over shipping, which I didn't even realize at first, is that I can, on my app, I can text somebody and say, hey, here's this, send the crypto to them instantly, and then, you know, very quickly, a couple minutes later, get the location of the drop where my product that I purchased is at. I can then go there, which could potentially be right around the corner, you know, or at least in the city. So in 30 minutes, you know, I could drive to where it is and pick up the product. I don't even have to wait like 3 days, a week, you know, 10 days if it's international shipping. It's a much faster turnaround, which is a much better customer experience. So not only are we having sort of a more private black market technology here, now it's even better. It's faster and it solves people's problems. Sean says, could that be used to transfer from Russia to US or other stuff like Amazon does? I mean, you'd have to ship it until we have like long-range drones. More on that later. That's pretty neat. So, let's see. So, transactions take hours instead of days. Big improvement. More importantly, this means that the customer no longer has to provide any private information to the merchant. So before on darknet markets, if I wanted to purchase something, I would, you know, of course, I'd have to give them my address of where to mail the product that I purchased. That means that the merchant has my address and usually my name too, because packages are looked at more suspiciously if they don't have the correct matching name to that address on them, right? So obviously I'm giving a very critical piece of information, and the transaction is no longer private. The merchant has that, and oftentimes it's kept on record for as long as the merchant chooses to do so. So if the merchant ever gets compromised, that's part of the information that the government then has access to. So that private information no longer exists anymore. I don't have to tell anybody anything about me. They don't need to know I am just a number or a name on a chat app, right? And also the merchant no longer has to worry about running security infrastructure to secure customer data in case they get raided. The risk is basically reduced across the board. Dead drops eliminate the risk of the merchant being discovered through government tracking through the postal systems. He never has to visit a post office anymore. He never has to visit a mailbox anymore. Obviously, the post office are very easily surveilled. They can sit and wait for you to come to ship your product and nab you. Then they don't have to know who you are. They just have to know which mailbox to watch. Well, now you don't need to. You don't ever need to set foot in a post office ever again. Instead, the entirety of the public world becomes the mailbox for everybody involved. Cryptocurrencies are still the main payment method for many reasons. There's cryptocurrencies that are much more private these days, Zcoin, Monero, things like that. Escrowing is rarely used and maybe less important because there's more of a direct relationship between the customer and the merchant. The challenge, though, is finding the drop gang, finding the merchant now, because there isn't a central place for you to go anymore, a central website, a known website to the public where you can go to hook up with the merchants. Right now, the vetting of the merchants and the vetting of the customers and the initial communication happens in darknet forums still, and chat channels that are better than the old method because the chat channels and the forums themselves have nothing to do with any deals or any commerce that's happening. So in a way, they're more above question. They're not breaking any laws. The downside is that this is still for a lot of people that don't have a real world person that can hand them off or show them to somebody, like clue them into one of these merchants. You still have to have a level of technological knowledge and know-how and find them on the darknet. On these chat rooms, though, everyone is able to, all the merchants and all the customers are able to discuss and agree on best procedures, methods, and prices. So this is now where the pricing competition happens, but it's also a big knowledge share. So it allows all of the actors involved to share their knowledge and their tradecraft and their best practices, which then helps the market improve itself, grow more secure and more private, and use better methods over time. These places also serve as a primitive way to sort of make a reputation. If a person's around for a long time, they're a staple in the chat room over time, they will grow a reputation for themselves. Obviously, this isn't as good as, verified purchasers leaving, 5-star reviews with a long sales history or whatever, but it is there. So the organizational structure of merchants back in the darknet market days was often very flat, very small, few number of people. That can now change as well. There's more freedom in the organizational structure that a merchant has available to them. One of the ways that was talked about in the article that I'm basing a lot of this content on, which I will link in the description for you, is a multi-level hierarchy where we have 3 levels to this hierarchy inside the merchant. We have the procurement layer, which purchases the product wholesale or grows it or makes it or buys it or finds it or whatever, and procures it. They smuggle it into the region. The procurement actors, people, sell the product for crypto to individuals in the second layer called the sales layer. And again, the product is transferred via dead drops and via crypto, and the communication on the location of all these transfers is done via end-to-end encrypted, anonymized communication. So the procurement layer has no knowledge of who the actual salespeople are, and the salespeople have no knowledge of who the procurement people are. Everybody gets paid, and everybody gets the product. It's kind of hard to infiltrate that going in either direction. So the sales people pick up their dead drop that they paid for. They divide the product into smaller units and then goes and takes those smaller units of the product and distributes them out into dead drops, and then basically gives the locations of those dead drops to people in the third layer, the distribution layer. The distributors, the people in the distribution layer, this is awesome stuff. I loved reading this, or learning about this. The distribution people then go and pick up those dead drops, divide the product again into typical sales quantities, and then go out and place them in new dead drops, often in and around where their customers are going to, where it's going to be convenient for their customers. The locations of these dead drops that the distributors then randomly pick, remember all these dead drop locations have to be different every time, otherwise you lose a big layer of security, because if the government knows that you're using the same location every time, they can just watch who uses that location every time. But then they communicate the layers of those final dead drop locations back to the sales layer, which is then able to sell those locations. The sales layer does the selling, they take the money, they disseminate the locations of where the dead drops are that the distributors placed out in the world. Again, the salespeople do these sales through these messaging systems. The people in each layer no longer have any knowledge or need to have any knowledge of the identity of the higher layers and the lower layers, and there is no knowledge needed anymore between these layers. These can be completely random, anonymized people that you never meet, you never know, you don't need to know anything about them, because it's all just crypto flying through the internet and dead drop locations, you know, that two people never actually physically meet at the same time, and can't meet at the same time, because at the time of the drop, it's a new random location that the person that's going to pick it up doesn't know about until the dropper is gone. I think you get that idea. So each layer in the market now, in the merchant piece of the market, now gains complete isolation from each other. There is no trace to follow if a person is captured while interacting with a dead drop. In fact, the captured person will not even usually be distinguishable from a regular customer. So even if I'm a sales layer person or a distribution layer person, and I'm dropping product at a location and the cops just happen to abduct me at that point, you know, I'm just interacting with the product at this location. I could just be a customer. To keep people in the distribution layer from stealing the product, the sales layer randomly tests dead drops by telling different distributors to pick up product from someone else's dead drop and then hiding it again somewhere else. Each unit of product that is distributed into a dead drop is usually tagged with a piece of paper with a unique word on it, which the tester distributor can then send back to the sales contact to prove that their assigned dead drop that they were assigned to go and verify was actually found and matched up, and everybody's being honest. Members of the distribution layer, to become a distributor, have to stake money up front in the form of cryptocurrency to the sales layer, and every time they fail to place a dead drop, or every time they fail to find and verify a dead drop, they lose a portion of their security. So they are incentivized to play fair, and to not only not steal, but also to participate in the verification system. That again is totally disconnected from one another. Pretty cool stuff. Advanced physical tradecraft, which we will not get into in this video, is used by operators to prevent surveillance from up-chain actors. So, for instance, the procurement people can't see who the sales layer is. So this is a risk. Like if you're a compromised sales or procurement layer person and you drop a bunch of product at a location and then you communicate that to the sales layer, there's without the sales layer people being careful, there's nothing stopping the procurement layer from setting up surveillance on that location to see who shows up to identify the person in the sales layer. So the downchain people have to be careful to use proper tradecraft. And this is the kind of information that gets traded around and talked about in the market chat rooms so that people get better at doing this well. This is important. So for the second time in human history, we have a black market system that has had 0 reports of any violence being used. So there have been 0 reports of any violence being used to ensure the performance of members of these structures. So again, in history, and this is happening recently, the black market has found technology that has made itself more peaceful in spite of government and their wars on drugs. So that's where the name for this strategy comes from. It has the kind of hierarchical nature of a gang, and it uses dead drops. That's where we get drop gangs. It's a highly decentralized, specialized, and resilient method for conducting black market commerce. Less information is acquired and has to be transferred between people. Shipments are way faster. Isolation between participants is high, and multiple independent sales channels get established. So if one drops off, all the merchants in the space don't get destroyed. I'll leave a link in the description for a lot more information on this than I'm even going to go into now. There's a lot more info on some of the weaknesses, such as the merchant reputation thing that I talked about briefly, and for detailed stuff like some of the tradecraft used, some of the stipulations around the use of cryptocurrency, anonymity, stuff like that. So, before I end this video, I would then want to talk about what's being worked on now to improve it even farther. Let's very quickly talk about the future of drop gang black markets. We can apply even more super cheap technology to make this even more awesome, right? The first is homing beacons. Homing beacons. So some of you may have seen or heard or even used these little Bluetooth devices. They're super low energy Bluetooth devices that can transmit for years. And you can basically place them in the drop so that a customer can come along with the correct ID on his Bluetooth app and just basically be directed to walk right to the dead drop, so it's much easier to find them. There's even beacons that can emit noise when maybe a Bluetooth setting is configured properly from an app, so you can basically trigger a beacon and hear where your dead drop is and then go walk over and pick it up. Those are a little bit less secure because the government can look for these beacons in public places, but another way of doing it is they have beacons that sit there silently until they see like a Wi-Fi network name pop up. So as part of your purchase, they can give you the dead drop location as well as the name of a Wi-Fi hotspot. And you can walk up with your phone and turn on the Wi-Fi hotspot and set the name of your Wi-Fi hotspot that your phone broadcasts to the name that the merchant gave you, which the beacon will then see and then activate, and you can find your dead drop. So it sits there completely silent like a piece of trash until you come along to pick up your product. Really awesome. There is messaging services, these end-to-end encrypted messaging services that are going to now integrate crypto transactions. So now even more laymen will be able to participate because they won't have to understand, mobile device Bitcoin wallets or a lot of the complexities around cryptocurrency purchasing and trading. And so these messaging services will integrate the payment in. They can also integrate the dead drop localizing functionality in, be it Bluetooth devices or whatever, and they can begin to integrate reputation tracking again. But because it's end-to-end encrypted, because it's one-off sort of between people, much more secure than a centralized darknet market. So what you're going to see probably over the next 10 years is potentially a large new labor market is going to be created. A lot of jobs are going to be created by this new drop gang black market. The skill ceiling for almost all these jobs is pretty low, like basic tradecraft for most of it. And the income will definitely be good because the government maintains the black market's existence, so you have to pay a premium for most of the products traded. Instead of delivering papers, the article that I'll link in the description said, instead of delivering papers, teenagers will just be able to service dead drops. Dead drops could be serviced, here's another big one. Dead drops could be serviced by drones, picking up and dropping off on random rooftops of buildings. That's a little mind-blowing, isn't it? Especially when you get into autonomous drones, drones that fly by wire or fly through cellular communication, so they don't have to, be within, several miles of a person sitting there controlling it. They can, control it on their computer or whatever. They can fly the drone to drop the product in the drop locations. And the dead drops can be serviced by each hop in the chain. So like the procurement layer can have a big heavy drone drop a lot of product, and the distribution layer will end up with a bunch of small drones that can drop these things all, whoever, wherever. You can imagine a lot of places that these drones could drop this stuff. So now the person doesn't even have to be at the dead drop location for this stuff to take place. Even the customer could potentially eventually like open an app where they rent a drone that will automatically fly to a randomized drop location to pick up the product that they purchased. Just really cool, mind-blowing stuff. You could even have like intermediary mixing, drone mixing services where to add layers of an anonymity to the transaction, a drone mixing service could like pick up the drops, randomize their locations, and set them back down, and then the service could provide the addresses only once payment had been given. Or maybe the drone system itself is the only one that actually knows where it put everything. So you basically tell it to, I've been paid, so deliver that product to that person or to that person's drop location, and then the drone knows where to pick it up. Anyway, we can talk about this forever. So, in conclusion, we are about to find out just how much freedom is possible when we combine all of this stuff. 4G, 5G, mobile internet, anonymous messaging, bots in these messaging protocols, anonymous untraceable digital currencies, strong end-to-end encryption, GPS, cheap electronics, 3D printed mechanics, cheap drones, short-distance multi-copters, and long-distance fixed-wing drones with visual processing for navigating themselves, and lots of code. So, interesting world that we are alive to see right now. If you enjoyed this content, if you like what we're doing here on Disenthrall, please consider supporting us. Check out disenthrall.me/platforms. And I will link an article with a lot of information on this in the description. Let me check chat real quick before I sign off. Today's our meetup day, so I want to get to the Dallas voluntarist meetup group. So what are you up, libertarian? What is the topic? Trust no one. We are talking about Dropgangs, which is the new sort of next-gen black market technology since darknet markets are getting raided so much. I guess you can rewind the video to hear everything. Turning the idea of the prisoner on its head. I need to watch that. I don't think I've watched that. How do you join? Message me about it on Signal. How could people in general join without getting caught? It sounds similar to what I've been thinking of, but maybe better, says Sean. So that was actually the last thing that I was going to do on this video. It was kind of a call for interviewees. So if someone's out there that knows someone that is wired into any of this activity, please reach out to me using whatever anonymized, secure communication method that you would like to do so with. And I would love to interview you, even if it's only via text, even if it never gets publicized. I can just report on what I learned from you. If you don't want us to publish anything, whatever you would like to do. I want to learn more about this, and I think it's a fascinating technological development that we're seeing happen right before us. So if you know anybody or you are somebody, I would love to speak with you. Please reach out. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.